I wish good things to you who's watching this. I am Alexey, and today we're doing our last Carcassonne game analysis game in the Mind Sports Olympiad series. Unless, of course, you have other suggestions and you've seen some interesting games in the Mind Sports Olympiad, in which case I'm happy to review them. But after this, we're going to move most likely to something else. Many things in the pipeline. Subscribe and stuff, follow and stuff. There's going to be more. So I'm playing in round number 7 against the former Hong Kong national champion Daniel Cheng, who also scored high results in a couple of world championships. He was in the top 10 twice, I think, in 2014 and 15, but has been playing consistently at a high level. This is a round 7 game, and the winner of this game guarantees a spot in the playoffs. So the reward is pretty tempting, and it's going to be a hard fight, yada yada yada, this. But the reason I'm showing this game, you'll see there will be a very unusual imbalance. And to be honest, I've played thousands of games, and I never until that day played a game that went to a remotely similar scenario to this. So you'll see what I mean. Standard moves at the start. Now I have this, a little bit, feels a little bit stingy because I'm leaving this 3-point road, and LSC can now take this road, which I would have done, but then another move sort of protecting this city over here, which actually, I mean, I would have preferred the road because, of course, there is a threat of me connecting and then taking over the city, but actually, it's not that big because I would need 3 triangles in order to accomplish that. So this move ends up serving us quite well because it forced our opponent to spend a tile on an essentially shared feature. And whenever your opponent spends a tile on a shared feature instead of their own feature, this means you're benefiting because in your move you're adding points to yourself, and in the opponent's move he's adding points to both of you. So the net sum of the exchange is in your favor. But of course it's only the start of the game. Then I make a very greedy road meeple, marginal value, but I still think it's a reasonable move because it makes sure a couple of things. It makes sure that my opponent doesn't draw crossroads and score easy 3 points. It also makes sure that if my opponent chooses to attack his city with a second meeple, he has to add a point to my road. And if he chooses to harass this meeple, he would also have to add 1 point to a road. So it's not just for the sake of 2 points. It's also kind of protecting this square from easy access to my opponent, something like this. So I know this might look weird to some of you, but you can play like that. You can also make this move without a meeple, but it's really marginal. Yeah, and you see, this actually also yielded some results, so my opponent again having to spend the tile on the shared feature, although it does create these 2 soft spots, which it makes it a little bit harder to finish those cities. But still, because there's so few tiles out, there's a reasonable chance of getting both these meeple back, and a very high chance of getting at least one of them back. Okay, now I have to invest in a shared feature. There wasn't really many better things to do with this tile, and also there is a threat of my opponent blocking this square and cutting me off from this growing city and gaining a 10 versus 3 advantage or something like this. So obviously want to prevent that from happening. The slight downside of this move, you will see when it comes. This move, also reasonable, sort of makes it harder for me to finish this city, harasses this point a little bit. The downside is that it adds a point to my city and also kind of, in some sense, alleviates the pressure from this point, because my opponent could have continued his road and attack from above. Now, of course, there's pressure on this point, but I don't know. It's double-edged. I mean, you could play like this. I probably might have done something different. This move, I think, might surprise some of you because I'm allowing to block this road. It's actually still well, it's still like slightly more value overall if you consider all the possible tiles than putting the monastery over here, because this would be the alternative. The thing is, this is 5 points, and a monastery over here would be 4 points. And the fact that I'm sorry, this is not my first take recording this, hands to the throat. If my opponent puts a tile here and blocks this connection, the thing is, the difference between these roads in terms of points, it's not that big, and my opponent would be adding another point to my monastery and make it easier to complete. So overall, I do think this is still correct. And this is what happens. So we end up without that road, which will cost us something, but such is life. And obviously here comes the move. So the game-defining move that will create this imbalance we're talking about. So after a move like this, by the way, if you're new to Carcassonne, what happens is that red is now attacking our shared city, and if he draws a tile that fits here, and there's still 5 of these tiles remaining, and 4 of these tiles remaining that fit really well here, and 4 tiles is, as I'm sure you remember, 94% chance. 94, 96, 94. I'm pretty sure it's 94 of completion. So it's not good for us. We will have to do something about it, but not with this tile, because the threat here is pretty big. Like, my opponent is threatening to score 25 or 24 points outright and be ahead, well, 24-0. That's like not good. That's almost game over. Many players would like panic and just try to attack the spot with anything. Like, I can see players putting here. Don't do that, because the probability of my opponent getting a saving tile is so high that it's very unlikely that they're going to be blocked, because there's tons of tiles that go that can be used as direct saves, and also quite a few tiles that can be used as indirect saves. So we have to be patient here and attack the city with the right tile. And if that doesn't happen, then maybe we try and find compensation, or maybe we just have to like live with the loss. So we can't really go crazy over here. So the situation is dire, but not desperate mode, and it's quite important to understand the distinction between the two. Of course, blocking attempt. We now build up our city. Feels a little bit stingy that we add a point to our opponent's road indirectly, but we're doing what we have to do. This move I was very happy to see, because my opponent's kind of giving me some hints at a compensation. So yes, he starts a new city and starts a slightly blocking attempt, but slightly better was to put this splitter tile the other way with this city cap facing up. Because the thing is, now my opponent giving this cap to me, and I can still draw a tile that fits here, there's plenty of those left, and score these 4 points. As opposed to if my opponent turned it the other way, I would need 2 tiles. One to finish this city, well, because you want to grab 4-point cities, especially when your opponent is threatening to grab way more than that. And I would need a separate road to continue over here. And the thing is, yes, this is done for a blocking attempt, but actually if you turn it the other way around, if you put this field side over here, it's almost just as constricting as the city side. So definitely I think a slight hasty decision on the part of my opponent, although understandable. Now another one, so this is a good block for sure, kind of a standard use of this a city road tile, where he also completes his own road, indirectly completes his own road, and harasses this meeple, not harasses, but simply attacks this spot over here. And now it's not very profitable for me to finish the city because of the threat of the attack over here. But here's the reason why actually I think meepling this is better. First of all, in this entanglement here, I can be pretty much okay with losing 1 meeple and risk it and take the city anyway. And there are some scenarios in which I get to take the 4 points and I get to take the meeple. In those scenarios, some luck is involved, but you know, if this is what exactly what I would need in order to compensate for a city like this. And yeah, so with three meeples, I think it was just a little bit safer to meeple this. It ends up not mattering. By the way, I am getting those 4 points that my opponent gifted to me. Um, but you know, slightly better to meeple. Although I understand like the value is pretty marginal because anyway, let's not dig in too deep into it. I'm sure you all aware I like putting meeples on things. And in this game more than other games. Okay, finally we get a suitable tile to attack this city over here. And now here comes an advanced, a pretty advanced question to you. From which side is it better to attack and why? The difference is very subtle, but there is one. This is more kind of question for advanced players, but I think if you're new to Carcassonne, you can give it a shot because it involves some spatial thinking. Okay, so the answer is, I'm convinced it's better to attack from here, which is what I did. And the reason for that is twofold. One, I do not want to be creating a monastery spot for my opponent because I already have a monastery spot next to my monastery, and that's the one that I want to be used. And another thing is there's still a sort of monastery spot over here, and if my opponent draws a monastery and meeples it, then the square over here that can be used to constrict this square over here, which I really need to make use of, becomes constricted. So it's a far-fetched scenario, like the chances are pretty low of that happening, but the thing is, it's small things like this that make this move slightly better than an identical move from the other side. So it's something, if you consider these kind of things, then it can give you, this extra 1 or 2% chances of getting a favorable result. So whenever you have a situation between two identical moves, seemingly identical, try to think how they could be not identical and pick the ever so slightly better one. So yeah, but that's a bit of a digression. It's kind of not the theme of the game. Now my opponent thought a lot, and Daniel now made a really good move, really precise, by constricting this meeple with this tile over here, and not the other way. Again, pause the video. This is more, this is I think suitable for intermediate and maybe even beginner players if you know all the tiles, of course. Yeah, just it doesn't take that long to learn the tiles. Anyway, or just enjoy the show. So the answer is the reason why this move is slightly better than putting the curve the other way is because there are now 4 suitable tiles that would fit here, but if you turn the curve the other way, there would be 5 suitable tiles that fit here. So slightly better chance for my opponent of preventing me from getting into this city. So yeah, definitely really nice move by Daniel over here. An alternative was to block off this meeple. So that's why I was kind of happy to see this in a sense. Because I now get to save my meeple over here, and now there's an 88% chance of me completing it. So in a game like this, where I'm at a disadvantage, I'll take that any day. By the way, it's also very often that when you have a feature that's about to get blocked and you can't save it, you can attack an opponent feature or create some sort of other threat elsewhere on the board to divert attention. Like for example, over here, this was completely unrelated to this, but because my opponent chose to prioritize constricting this connection over here, I got away with saving my meeple. So it's important to also, sometimes it's, I guess, like a football saying that the attack is the best defense. Maybe not, maybe in Carcassonne it's not the best defense, but it isn't an alternative defense if you don't have an actual defense. But Merce keep getting good tiles. It's actually important to meeple this, because we are at a disadvantage. Well, we're technically at an advantage in the scoreboard, but we're -3 in meeples, and this road's about to get completed. This city is more likely than not to get completed, and this will give my opponent 22 or even 24 points, depending on whether this tile comes with a shield. So we don't have a reliable way of getting into the city, so we need to, and we can't block it. So if you can do joining or blocking, the third option, which often gets overlooked, is compensation. How do you compensate for something like this? There's two ways. One is, well, three ways, but they're not really possible in this game. Only one is possible in this game. So the first way is utilize your meeple advantage while the opponent is waiting for the completing tile. Because, you know, my opponent has 2 meeples over here and I have 1 meeple over here. Eventually, my opponent is going to get his meeple back, but while they're there, I could use my meeple advantage. The problem why this doesn't apply here is that I have no meeple advantage. I have a meeple disadvantage and a massive one because I already invested my meeple elsewhere. So I can't really do that. Another thing is, what you can do is you can at the very least make sure that a city like this doesn't come with a field meeple when completed. And you can start kind of getting compensation by building it around with field meeples. If you get a curve over here, you can get potential 6 points on this field. If you get a curve over here, or even a monastery over here, you can put it over here and get potentially 9 or 12 points on this field. So you can start dropping around field meeples. Again, this is not something that we can do because we don't have those meeples, and now putting my monastery over here would have been a pretty hefty mistake. But it's something that you can do in some games, and there was one game in the spring in the World Team Carcassonne Online Championships, Latvia-Lithuania, which was a team in which I played against Brazil. I was playing against a Brazilian player with a screen name Mahia Ma. If you're interested, I can send you a link to this game, which was a very unusual game in many ways. But there was a moment that my opponent actually managed to complete a big city, but because she was waiting for that tile quite long, I ended up getting sufficient compensation to win the game because I put field meeples from all sides and kind of softened the blow a little bit. And most importantly, didn't let the opponent put a field meeple herself upon completion. But again, this doesn't apply here. So we only have the third type of compensation is points, points, points. Quick points, meeple stuff. So for example, now we have our last meeple, and my opponent's still doing everything by the book, continuing to further constrict the square, further decreasing my chances of breaking this city. And obviously, even though this is our last meeple, we have to do this. It's just way too good a spot. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 places where we can get our meeple back. So obviously this move has to come with a meeple in a situation like this. In a different situation where we're in the lead, we want to reduce the variance and possibly sacrifice some points. So it could be a little bit different, but here, all day. Okay, now my chances are getting even lower because my opponent even got some insurance so that if I connect over here, then he connects over here. So it's, I mean, I shouldn't really put my hopes up too high. Okay, if you are a beginner player or an intermediate player, quick quiz to you. You have 2 roads, and we're fortunate enough to choose a closing tile. Where do you put it? Over here or over here? Which road do you finish? And yeah, or do you grab 2? Don't grab 2 points. You have to finish one of those roads. You don't have any meeples. Come on. So this one or this one. 3, 2, 1. The answer is this one because you don't want to constrict your own monasteries. By the way, this is a little bit of luck because normally the expectation would be that given the tiles remaining, I should receive a tile that helps me complete something, maybe a couple of moves later. So it was nice to receive it in this move. And pretty much in this game, we took turns to get lucky with my opponent. See, now my opponent is utilizing his meeple advantage, creating a potentially 9-point field, but really potentially 15-point field, because this can be easily connected over here, or he can get a curve and throw a second field meeple over here. So this is starting to look really threatening, and that's kind of how you use your meeple advantage. We grab a couple of points, and also importantly, we slightly constrict this field, because in some scenarios a curve comes here, another curve comes here, and then this city can end up in this field, and then this field can end up massively expanding, and we will have no chances with our meeple situation to fight for it. So all we can do is grab points and maybe make sure that the landscape develops in our favorable manner. Okay, so it happened. 22 points, 26-point advantage on the board, 5-2 meeple advantage. Our situation is not very good, and also a big field brewing. So we don't really have much options than compensation. A huge mistake would be to try and fight for this field right now. Like, we're losing it because there's this. Just the opponent's meeple advantage is way too big, so we have to find elsewhere how to score points. So we just clean up the city caps, and a very important thing to do, because these are now worth 7 points rather than 4 for our opponent, because this field meeple over here. Now, second meeple comes in the field, which is understandable. I think maybe a little bit premature. A more patient move would be to wait until I place a meeple on the field to kind of induce me into thinking that I could tie this field, and then play the second one, because now my opponent will have this field, but the investment of this meeple is a little sacrifice. So now with this tile, again, we need to go aggressive. Like, we need to obviously grab the city. A decent move would be even to placing it like this, because it creates an unblockable spot. There's a 75% chance that I'm going to draw this tile, and then it comes with a 3-point road. But I figured that 75% is not enough, and that my meeple advantage does not allow me to wait for the requisite city cap for too long. So I went for the more straightforward move, this. The disadvantage is this, that I sort of get semi-blocked, and now I need the same tile over here and over here. By the way, here's a quick quiz for you. So it actually is possible to play this game without overly thinking about math, but some basic probabilities you have to know. And this one, I was surprised how many players didn't know it, because it's a little bit counterintuitive. So there are 3 tiles that fit in these 2 identical holes. What's the probability that I can complete both cities? 3, 2, 1. No, it's not 1/3, and it's not 33%. It's actually 50%. So it's greater than most people think. You can prove it very, very easily. It's just like Pascal's triangle and high school combinatorics. Or you can also think that in order for me to finish these cities, I need to get 2 out of 3. But in order for me not to finish at least one of these cities, my opponent needs to get 2 out of 3. So we basically need the same thing. So it's obviously 50-50. But I mean, if you just think about it enough, you'll get it. Or sorry, maybe if that was obvious for you, but trust me, I had quite a few conversations with top-level Carcassonne players, and it's not obvious for everybody. So yeah, well, the bright side is that our opponent added 1 point to us and created and slightly constricted this field. And if anything, this meeple is now scoring 3 points, and this meeple is now scoring 4 points. So even if we never get to complete the city, it's not that tragic. We get to complete our monastery. That's great. It's possible to play this move without a meeple, but I want to still, given the disadvantage, to be extra aggressive on the value, and it's still reasonable. Like, it's not an easily blockable spot unless I get very unlucky and my opponent, draws a big city tile or something. Again, have to do the meeple too good of a spot. And now we get the first out of 3 tiles that fit in these holes. So I have a Sophie's choice to make. Do I complete this city and monastery that would fit so nicely here? Do I complete this one, but I don't get to score 3 points over here because I have no meeples? Or do I get to complete this one and also add 3 points to my opponent's field? So all these moves have slight disadvantages. Which one would you do? I did this one. The main reason is that I connect also the opponent's meeples. Now it's 2 meeples scoring 9 points in this field, which is 4.5 points for meeple, which is really not a lot. Of course, a curve is going to come here, and eventually it's going to be 15 points for 2 meeple, which is already something. But overall, this field is not growing very substantially as a result of this tile. Like, these 2 roads, they block everything so nicely. So yeah, and one of the thing is that we want to be able to score these 3 points in the future. Like, such greed, such greed. Okay, this is the first time where I don't meeple stuff because I just can't afford this. We'll have to leave this one empty, unfortunately. So this is what I mean by that we're getting taking turns to get lucky. Like 3 monasteries in a row is pretty nice, and that's already is a nice compensation. As you see on the scoreboard, we're equalized. My opponent still has an advantage, I think, because of the 4-2 meeple advantage. And this is, guys, is getting stuck here for a long time, and I have a 75% chance of completing it, and 10% chance of completing it on every move, but it could happen a long time from now. Also because my opponent now drew this tile that fits here, and now I have only 50% chance. But the reason where I wasn't getting lucky is I wasn't getting any particular extraordinary tiles. It's just the flow was very advantageous for me in this stage of the game, so that's why I managed to rack up this compensation very quickly. Because I didn't stay out without meeples for too long. Kind of every move I was able to extract value, although I probably should expect on average to lose a couple of points in value here and there. Yep. So very painful for me to watch how my opponent gets these easy 4 points. Now we are about to take this city, and I think if we take this city, we get the lead. And my opponent gets a pretty good tile, like a juicy tile. You know, you can start a city or something, or even this 3-point road. But again, there is this threat, so my opponent chose to block, which is understandable. And also, it's a block that's not just a constriction, but really a block, because there's only 1 tile like this, and I have 2 holes that are shaped like this, so I will lose one of these meeples for sure. But I'll probably still survive. The downside of this move is that my opponent, instead of taking points for himself, added 3 points to my features by this move. Maybe it was necessary, and probably was. But what happened later, I think, is a bit of an oversight. Yeah, we're now just keep getting value. So maybe these blocks were a little bit excessive. Like, first of all, there's already only a 50% chance of me completing it. It maybe in some situations it's good enough. Should I take the leads? Probably my opponent can be happy with 50%. And given that I'm already losing one of those meeples, I mean, it's like, this move is okay, but the next one is also technically okay, like this block over here, because there wasn't much better. There weren't many better things to do. But again, juicy tile, 2 points, potentially 4 points worth. And my opponent ended up spending so many tiles on blocking over here. So here comes an interesting situation. like none of these three moves were actually a mistake, but maybe a combination of these three were. Because if you see, like, my opponent could have almost built a city for himself with these three tiles. You can kind of get a rhombus with these four triangles, and that city worth 14 points. Or okay, 12 or 14 points. That's not nothing. And also, my opponent added 3 points to me, so it's a lot of points potentially over here. Yeah, and actually, if you look at the whole tendency of this game, 1, 2, 3 times my opponent added points to me. Then these two moves, I mean, these are still, like, these are reasonable, but maybe that was the thing that let me gain enough compensation and run away with a victory with this game despite this city over here. It's a little bit hard to tell. And of course I needed a few lucky tiles to do that. But let me illustrate this. So at the moment, here's like the unusual imbalance in the situation. We have a completed city and a field versus 3 monasteries. I never had this combination happen to me. It's very often monasteries versus field, monasteries versus big and complete city, field versus big and complete city. But this type of thing was like really new for me, despite having played thousands of games, and really had to adjust our strategy here. And the main thing that I understood when assessing the situation, so it kind of doesn't look very good for me still. It looks, oh, you know, your opponent has a sizable field. I have 1 meeple, and it's roughly the same on the scoreboard. But actually, these 2 meeples score 13 points, 5 plus 8. And these 2 meeples score 15 points. So like this equals this. It looks very counterintuitive because like, oh, this is this ugly shaped hole, and these look so small together, and this looks so big together. But if you just stop for a while and count up the actual points, like this is the same as this kind of field. And it wasn't really until this game that I kind of realized how this imbalance works. So I guess the moral from this, what a terrible word. Never mind, it's been a long day. The thing that you can think about sometimes is think twice before adding points to your opponent's features. Like there has to be a really, really good reason. Because it happens quite a few times in the game. And maybe that's the thing that let me get away with it. Again, no problem starting a city with your last meeple. There is a sufficient number of city caps. There's still a few crossroads in play. There are monasteries with a road in play. I can get my meeples back. That was a good move and very annoying one for me, because now this takes away 2 tiles that I could use for road completion. And if I ever want to get this meeple back or add any point to this road, I have to let Daniel into my field. And so I had to do that. Yes, again, very threatening move. 6-point field, potentially 9-point field. I kind of was, I was hoping to do that myself during the game, but I just didn't have the meeples to do that. Okay, now we're really about to seal the game with this monastery, but our opponent gets some luck once in a while and gets there first. Of course, we grab points. Yeah, this was quite an unlucky tile for my opponent, and he did find the best move, because what this move does is that it makes it harder for me to block this monastery, and it also sets up an extra point for a monastery over here, which my opponent would want to draw. But I think at this point the game is sealed after I do this. By the way, it's important that I not place this tile over here just for a measly 4 points, because there's some scenarios how my opponent could take over this field through an outside curve, and when you really want to kind of close down the game when you're slightly ahead, and by slight I mean really slightly. Like, so at the moment I'm winning in any scenario, but in the worst case scenario I'm only winning something like +2 or +3, so it's still really, really close. So obviously we do this, and we get some luck to seal the deal. That wasn't like strictly necessary, but you know, I'll take an extra monastery any day, especially when my opponent needs it so much. And then the final piece of luck is this one. Also was not strictly necessary, but you know, I'll take that any day. Yeah, so I don't know what you think of this game. It just made me discover a couple of new. It made me think about like the Carcassonne dynamics a little bit differently. The way different objects balance each other, even though they have nothing to do with each other, and also sometimes when you cannot block an opponent's city, or you can't connect to the city, there's a third option, is seeking compensation, and in this case it sort of worked, kind of meepling more stuff than even I normally would, which required some risk and required a little bit of luck, but you know, you gotta need that in a Carcassonne game. All right. If you have any questions about it, or if you have any comments, because I know I made some, well, let's say, moves that could be material for discussion. Or if you have any game suggestions or video suggestions, anything, let me know. I love talking about Carcassonne in the comments. Also, on the 19th, that is the day after tomorrow. Actually, I'm not sure when I'm going to publish this. So on the 19th of September, I'm going to be live streaming, and I'm going to be live streaming live commentary for the US National Carcassonne Championship playoffs. Hopefully that could be of interest of some of you. I think that's 1 p.m. Pacific time, which is evening in Europe, but just subscribe to my channel, then you get the notification. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.